Do you remember that classic Nagel paper, The Absurd,
I do.
which we're actually reading for next week?
Good. So you should.
Yes. So what do you think of Nagel's view that life is ultimately absurd, which I can remind you of the, sorry, I should have prompted you beforehand, but I can never remember these things myself, but I was just looking at it. And the point, I think, is that it's very closely connected with Hume's remark about skepticism and playing backgammon.
Yes.
And how in the seminar room, in fact, Nagel has a footnote where he quotes that passage from Hume. So in the seminar room, it seems we don't know that we're seated around a table, and also in the seminar room, we don't know whether happiness is valuable or friendship is valuable or selfishness is bad. You know, there's moral skepticism as well as skepticism about our knowledge of the external world. So we feel we don't know these things, or at any rate, if asked to justify why we think that, you know, we ought to keep our promises or something to someone else, eventually the chain of justification is going to run out and we'll just be left stammering. And then, of course, we go down the pub and play some backgammon and make merry with our friends and just forget about these deep worries. And so I think Nagel's point is, well, that's that is just a gap, a discrepancy between our aspirations and reality. So we're just like pretending that we are entitled to rely on these things and to live our lives on the assumption that this has value and that doesn't, or that we know this and we don't know that. But in fact, we can't provide any justification for it ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, that's not quite my memory of the piece. And since misrememberings can be as interesting as rememberings, I didn't think that it depended on the contrast between backgammon in the pub and how we felt in the philosophy classroom. I think it was more general. It was just our lives with all their little concerns. When you put them into the scale of eternity, seem absurd. And I think my instinct now would be to resist what he says and to say that I think it's a mistake to think it's absurd. You only think that. So it's not about skepticism. Maybe his was. It's a mistake. It's because you're yearning for something more transcendental or transcendent that it comes to look absurd. And that, do you know his later paper called something like Secular Philosophy and the Religious Temperament?
Oh, yes, I do actually. I haven't read that for a while.
Yeah. I would think that, as it were, enlightenment or advance into the secular religiosity, the religious attitude that is appropriate for someone who has no dogmatic religious belief, advance into that should, in the end, mean that you no longer feel it's absurd because you go into a kind of acceptance and you see what is valuable about this brief span.
Right.
Just trying it on, Alex.
The start of that paper.
I love the start. Which one? The Absurd.
The start of The Absurd is about how, on the one hand, it seems appropriate to express the absurdity of life by noting that we're minute and we don't live very long, and, you know, compared to the vast scale of existence, we're but a tiny speck. But then, as he points out, of course, this is just some metaphor, and it's not really clear why it's an appropriate metaphor, because, you know, if we were the size of the universe, or the universe shrank in size, or if we lived forever, the sense of absurdity wouldn't go away.
Right. I think he also says that we reflect that nothing we do now will matter in a million years. And then he says, well, in that case, it doesn't matter now that nothing will matter in a million years.
More with Galen Strawson next time, the last lecture on Wednesday. Read Scheffler, Death and the Afterlife. I'll see you then.